At 18:24, on August 12, 1985, Captain Masami Takahama heard a loud bang echo through the cockpit of his Boeing 747. 12 minutes into what should have been a routine 54-minute flight from Tokyo to Osaka, something had gone catastrophically wrong. The rear pressure bulkhead had ruptured. The vertical stabilizer was gone. All 4 hydraulic systems had failed. 524 people were now trapped in an uncontrollable aircraft at 24,000 feet. For the next 32 minutes, Captain Takahama and his crew fought the impossible. They had no rudder, no elevators, no way to steer except by adjusting engine thrust. The 747 pitched and rolled wildly in what pilots call a Dutch roll, completely beyond human control. What happened in those final 32 minutes would become one of aviation's most haunting cockpit voice recordings. But the real tragedy wasn't just the crash itself, it was what came after. 4 people survived the initial impact. Many more might have lived if rescue teams had reached the remote mountainside that first night, instead of waiting 14 hours. This is the story of Japan Airlines Flight 123, the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history. A disaster that could have been prevented if a single repair had been done correctly 7 years earlier. The crash site was on Mount Osaka in the mountainous terrain of Gunma Prefecture, about 100 kilometers from Tokyo. When investigators finally reached the wreckage, they found the twisted remains of what had been one of the safest aircraft ever built, the Boeing 747 SR, designed specifically for Japan's high-density domestic routes. But the roots of this disaster stretched back to June 2, 1978. 7 years before Flight 123's final flight, the same aircraft, registration JA8119, had suffered what's called a tail strike during landing at Osaka International Airport. The plane's tail hit the runway, causing substantial damage to several aft fuselage frames, the outer skin, and most critically, the aft pressure bulkhead. 25 passengers were injured in that landing, but the aircraft was repairable. Japan Airlines contracted a Boeing aircraft on-ground team to assess the damage and perform the repairs. This was standard procedure. Boeing knew their aircraft better than anyone. The repair manual was clear. For a damaged pressure bulkhead, Boeing's procedure called for 1 continuous splice plate, secured with 3 rows of rivets. This design would distribute stress evenly across the repair and maintain the structural integrity that kept passengers safe at 35,000 feet. But that's not what happened. The Boeing technicians used 2 splice plates instead of 1 continuous plate. That mistake changed how the damaged bulkhead carried pressure. Instead of spreading the load evenly, the repair forced too much stress onto a single row of rivets, weakening the structure against fatigue cracking. Investigators later calculated the repair would fail after about 10,000 pressurization cycles. By August 12, 1985, the aircraft had completed 12,319 flights since that repair. With every takeoff and landing, the cabin pressurized and depressurized. The bulkhead flexed. Tiny cracks began forming around the rivet holes. Over 7 years, those cracks slowly connected, hidden under overlapping metal plates where normal inspections could not easily see them. Japan Airlines crews had no idea the tail of JA8119 was carrying a hidden failure. That morning was the start of Obon, one of Japan's busiest travel periods. Families were flying across the country to honor their ancestors. Flight 123 was full, with 509 passengers and 15 crew members on board. The aircraft was a Boeing 747 SR, built for Japan's short, crowded domestic routes. Captain Masami Takahama, an experienced 747 pilot, was in command. First Officer Yutaka Sasaki was training for captain, while flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda watched the aircraft systems. At 1812, Flight 123 lifted off from Tokyo Haneda, running behind schedule because of heavy holiday traffic. It was the aircraft's fifth flight of the day. For the first few minutes, everything looked normal. The aircraft climbed toward 24,000 feet. Passengers settled in. Flight attendants prepared for the short trip to Osaka. Then, at 18:24 and 35 seconds, a loud boom shook the aircraft. Captain Takahama asked, "What happened?" The nose pitched up. Warning lights filled the cockpit. Oxygen masks dropped as air rushed out through the rupture in the tail. The aft pressure bulkhead finally failed. 7 years of stress had weakened the bad repair until it could no longer hold cabin pressure. When it ruptured, explosive decompression tore through the tail section with massive force. The blast damaged the auxiliary power unit, blew away parts of the tail, and ripped off much of the vertical stabilizer and rudder. But the worst damage was hidden. All 4 hydraulic lines were severed. In seconds, Flight 123 lost normal flight control. Captain Takahama declared an emergency and requested a return to Haneda. For 32 minutes, they struggled to keep the aircraft flying. Controllers tried to guide them, but the crew could not follow normal headings. At 1856, Flight 123 struck a ridge near Mount Osutaka. The impact was devastating, but somehow 4 people survived. Flight attendant Yumi Ochiai woke in the wreckage, hearing voices and cries in the darkness. Hiroko Yoshizaki and her 8-year-old daughter Mikiko survived. 12-year-old Keiko Kawakami also survived after losing her parents and sister. All 4 survivors had been seated near the rear of the aircraft. The crash happened while there was still daylight. A U.S. Air Force C-130 spotted the site about 20 minutes later and sent the location to Japanese authorities. American rescue teams were ready to help. A JSDF helicopter later reached the area after dark, reported no signs of life, and did not land because of the terrain. Ground teams waited until morning. That delay became one of the most painful parts of the disaster. When rescuers arrived 14 hours later, they found 4 survivors. But Yumi Ochiai later said she had heard voices, cries, and calls for help through the night. One by one, they faded. After Flight 123, crash response could no longer assume everyone was dead. The new rule became simple: search as if someone survived. The 4 survivors carried the crash for the rest of their lives. Mount Osutaka became a memorial where families return every August 12th. Flight 123 remains the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history. But its real lesson is simple. One incorrect repair made 7 years earlier set everything in motion. Captain Takahama and his crew fought for 32 minutes with almost no control left. They could not beat the physics of that broken aircraft, but they never stopped trying. The mountain is quiet now, but the lesson still speaks. In aviation, no mistake is small.